Welcome everybody to the Firegrinders Podcast. It's been a really long time. My name is Sash and I'm joined with my good friend Sean and co-host of the show.
Hey guys.
We're really excited to be back today. It has been a really long time. Lots of family
Far too long.
Lots of family drama, lots of personal stuff happening in between. But we are very excited to be bringing you a brand new show today. Sean, what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about budgeting, which is a huge foundation for any finance plan. You can't achieve your goals if you don't know what your goals are and how you're going to reach them. So budgeting kind of gives you the awareness to do those things. So we're going to be going through the ins and outs of how to budget, what it is, why it's important, the systems that we use, kind of give you guys some pointers for things that we've discovered in the journey, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you guys.
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to that too. I think that's certainly the starting point to building any kind of financial plan or financial
I agree.
freedom as we have kind of decided to pursue here. It always starts with learning your numbers, learning where your money is going. And so
absolutely,
I'm hoping that today's episode will be really valuable to not only those of us starting out in finance, but also those of us who've been doing it for a little while and just want a better grasp of our finances, as well as to have a little more control on how to be more efficient with our finances. So we've got a couple of points to talk about today. We're also going to try and share our screen. So for those of you watching on video, you can check this out wherever we post the video to this content. For those of you listening to the audio only, you are free to check out the videos. We'll have links to that in the description of the show notes section. So hopefully that'll bring you guys some value. We'll also have links to all of the tools and spreadsheets and things like that we use and we'll showcase in today's video. By the way, if you guys have not subscribed yet, please consider doing so. Definitely give us a like as well. It really helps us out and helps us and tells us basically that this content is valuable. All right, let's jump straight into it, my friend. Tell us about the purpose of budgeting. We've heard this term thrown around a lot. We've, of course, mentioned it many times, but why is it important?
So budgeting, the way I see it, it allows you to build awareness of where your money's going.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have any kind of financial plan, that means that you want to be able to redirect your money into the things that you find important, whether that's paying down debt, building an emergency fund, investing for retirement, have a savings goal to, let's say, save for a down payment for a home. It could take any number of forms, but in order to direct money into those things, you have to have an awareness of where your money's going right now so that you can redirect it appropriately. So the way that I see budgeting is it builds your awareness of where your money's currently going. It allows you to redirect that money to where you want it to go. And that's kind of the way to see it, in my opinion. A lot of people, I think, have this perception that budgeting is like dieting. It means like cutting calories and restricting yourself to the point of misery. And I don't view it that way. I think you can achieve your goals and also have a quality of life now that's not miserable. I think there's a balance point to be had in those two things. So I think it's important to kind of switch your thinking a little bit and consider budgeting in that light, that it doesn't have to be a miserable experience. You could take 20 or 30 minutes a month, sit down and plan your month out and track things throughout the month. And it's a very low maintenance, low stress process that helps you achieve your goals. So, and it gives you a good, touch points along the way to know whether you're meeting those goals too,
Sure.
A lot of people have this perspective where they're just kind of floating throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month. They get money in, they pay bills, they maybe throw some money into savings or pay debt down, but they really don't have an awareness of how much they're doing in those respects. But being able to look back, 6 months ago and see your debt position or your savings at that point is huge,
Absolutely.
So
let's talk about some of the misconceptions around budgeting and why it sometimes might be, daunting or intimidating for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? What are some of the misconceptions people might have around budgeting?
Well, I mentioned, too, right off the bat, that a lot of people have this view that it's just a miserable process, that the only purpose of budgeting is to cut your spending down to the point where, you can do the things you want to do, but consequently you're going to be miserable while you're doing it. So that's probably the biggest misconception. And the second misconception, in my opinion, is the amount of time that it takes to budget and track your budget appropriately. And a lot of people just don't feel like they have 1 or 2 hours a week to sit down and go through their finances, comb through every single charge in their accounts, and allocate it to a category and just track things that way. And the reality is, there's tools out there now. There's apps, there's software, there's websites that help you do this, that automate a lot of it, that make it really, really streamlined, really simple. It's not a huge time demand. We're going to go through some of the systems that work for us. And I think I want to say at the outset too, we're not affiliated with any of these companies, any of these apps. We're not selling anything. We don't get commissions based on our talking about these. These are just systems that we've found that work for us. Awesome. And there's a couple things that I've been doing for a couple years that have worked. So long term, I can say that it's sustainable for me. And I'd probably, I'd recommend it based on that. I know you'd say the same thing with your system, Sash. So,
yeah, absolutely. I'm honestly looking forward to hearing about your system, because I'm very sure that I'm going to learn a lot today. So I'm really excited. All right, cool. So how... we've obviously talked about why budgeting is important. How frequently should somebody put their numbers down in this app or spreadsheet or whatever they use to track their budget? Like, how often should somebody actually go through their numbers?
So it kind of depends. It depends on you. Some people can make it work by sitting down once a week and doing it. Some people can, look at it daily for 1 or 2 minutes and just track things as they go throughout the day too. It really depends on what you want to do and how the flow works for you. I can tell you what works for me is that at the beginning of the month, the beginning of the calendar month, my wife and I will sit down and look at our budget for the month. We'll know we have, 4 or 5 paychecks because we're both paid biweekly. Yeah. And those lucky months I love. You get those 5 checks in and you're like, extra payday. Awesome. I love it. But so we sit down and we look at our income, and then we look at what our expenses are, our planned expenses for the month, and figure out, if we have something coming up that month, like, we have to pay extra on childcare, or we need, to do something else. We have someone coming in town. We know we're going to be spending a little bit more in terms of going out or something like that. Those things come up. We'll try and allocate money accordingly to those. And I can actually, let me go ahead and screen share. Yeah, we'll get into the first thing that I thought was useful. So this website is called EveryDollar. It's EveryDollar.com, and it's actually a piece of software by Dave Ramsey. Mm-hmm. My wife and I have been using it for a couple of years here, and it's really been awesome to help us track our expenses and everything. So typically what we'll do for the month is we'll go through at the beginning of the month, and we'll sit down and just kind of plan out the month as best we can. Uh-huh. So you can see, let me give you a basic run of the layout here. So this is for the next month, November 2021. This number here will give you a running total as you plug things into income and expenses of how much you have left to budget. So the name EveryDollar, it's named EveryDollar because ideally you want to be allocating every dollar for the month to a category. And then obviously there's some flexibility there. If you have something come up in a certain category and you need to spend more, you can go in then and say, okay, that left us $60 over budget for the month. So we need to kind of remove that from somewhere else, and get it back to that 0 point. So the top section here is where you put your income in. This is going to be your paychecks. So we've got 4 paychecks here. This isn't one of those wonderful months where you have 5 paychecks for the month. I love those months. My wife and I are paid bi-weekly. Yeah. Have that extra check as like a little bonus, but yeah. So this month we have 4 paychecks. So we put the amounts in over here. And then I also put just an additional $500 in there from additional income. Let's say you have something coming in that you didn't expect. You can put that in here too. So the total planned income for the month is $8,100. And then as you go down, the rest of this is going to be your expenses. So what offsets the income? So, and you can organize these by different categories. These are kind of the categories that work for us. But we have like our 2 Roth IRAs. We each contribute $500 to max it out for the year. And this will kind of give you, to answer your question, kind of an idea of the different categories you want to consider in your own budget. Yeah. So investments would definitely be one of them, as well as savings items. Would
investments count as expenses? I suppose they would, though.
Yeah, anything coming out of your income or drawing against your income for the month, I think would be considered an expense. So just the way to think of that too is these are pluses and anything below it is minuses. Got it. So anything that is cash flow outward for your household would be anything below here. So if I change this, for example, if I went to $600 for the month, which would be ridiculous because that puts me over the cap for the year, but it would reduce this down. So we're now $63 over budget. So anything that comes out below here takes away from the top. So I went ahead and just plugged some sample numbers in here, just to kind of give you guys an idea of how this works. But yeah, so investments would be one. Savings, if you contribute to your emergency fund every month, you could put what you put in here. If you guys have like a college savings account for your kids, you could put that in here as well. And you could set these up however you like. These are completely customizable. They don't have to follow the spread here that we use. You can set them up however the flow works best for you. So we have it set up with, the next category being housing. So mortgage, putting a little money aside for regular maintenance that comes up or repairs throughout the month. Obviously, this wouldn't cover anything catastrophic, and that's why we have our emergency fund. But these are just kind of a little extra cash put into those categories for, if I have to go buy some supplies at the hardware store for $50 to make a repair, small repair. Utilities, you've got, cell phone, water, garbage, electric, internet, things like that. You can plug in under this category. And again, these are just some sample numbers that would change the total at the top here.
Yeah, I think that's also something people might overlook quite easily because it's so common, because it's so mundane almost. We tend to forget that it's actually quite a consistent expense and can escalate. If
absolutely
not under control. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And these are what I consider our fixed expenses for the month. I'll go through the rest here. We'll go back up. But what I do is figure out what periodic expenses I have throughout the year. So these are those bigger things that land, once or twice a year. They could be your registration costs for your car, which for us are usually in the tune of like $300 to $400. And when that lands, it used to be a surprise. It'd be like, oh, it's March. I got to register my car, and so we have to find out where we're going to get $400 a month or that month to pay the registration. So what I've done is taken that and broken it out over the cost of a year. And then what we do is take this money.
I love that.
Yeah. And just put it into a second savings account that is kind of like our periodic expenses account. Yeah. So that builds. And then when we have, a registration hits, I know I have money set aside for that. Just pull it out of that, transfer it over, and we pay it with that.
That is awesome. That's amazing. I love it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do this. Good. Yeah. I'm stealing that. It works for us. That's great.
That's cool. No, it works for us. I'm glad it was helpful because we used to have these things hit and it was always just this surprise and it would drive me crazy. Sure. So
it does. It drives me crazy too. I got one coming up in December. So
yep, exactly. And then it's kind of funny. I've left these alone, like our registration costs or something that goes down year over year, but I left it alone. So this is what we were paying when we first registered my car. So we always have a little bit of extra money floating around in there and it's building. And eventually I could just take like whatever surplus is there and transfer it to our emergency fund or, invest it or whatever we decide to do with it. So it's always building a little bit more of a buffer too. But
that's awesome.
Let's see other categories. We, have groceries, household items, those are things like paper towels and toilet paper and shampoo and things like that. Anything that's not a food item that we purchase for the household every month goes under that.
Okay. So you split the two, groceries and household items. Okay.
Yeah. That's how we do it. But whatever works for you guys, you could have just a general, monthly spending thing that captures both of those, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Home security, things like clothing, and these are just these aren't the actual numbers my wife and I use. These are our categories, but I just kind of put some money, some numbers in here to just ballpark. Clothing, $150 a month sounds kind of high for me, but I was trying to get it down to the 0 point, so I threw a little extra in there. Childcare, $1,000 a month. And you can go on down and just look at these different categories. Under transportation, there's gas, auto insurance, maintenance. And auto insurance is one of those ones where if you pay it every 6 months, that could also fall under periodic expenses too, medical, co-pays, medications. I put gym dues under there for us too because it's health related. And then recreation, we've got it broken down to entertainment. That's like going to the movies or things like that. If we take the kids to the zoo, we could put that down under there. And $50 is probably a little low for that, depending on the monthly plan. But vacation, birthdays, gifts, holidays, things like that we spend on. If we're buying Christmas decorations, or we know we have, birthday gifts for the nephews or nieces or whatever, we'll put that under there.
So you would do this every month?
Yep.
And you just like set money aside every month for like vacations or for gifts or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know, like, so if we're taking a staycation, for 3 days up in Phoenix, we know that's going to be $300. Let's say we would go through and be like, okay, for November, we know we're going to have a little money that we need to put in here. Let's put $300 in there. And then after we do that, we know that with everything else set up the way it is, we're now $263 over budget. So let's find somewhere else to kind of back that out. Maybe we decide to go out, not 1,200. We decide to go out and eat a little bit less. We'd pull that out of there, and then you can go on through and adjust it down too, and find other categories. So this is just kind of a rough ballpark for the month as we see it. And then these are the periodic expenses we covered before.
Got it. I love what you're doing there with setting money aside for gifts as well as vacations, because sometimes we're not planning ahead for those things. If we get like a little bit extra, maybe an extra paycheck, like you said, suddenly we're like, oh, maybe I can go on a vacation and I've got some extra money, instead of actually being intentional and purposeful about setting money aside if that's something that's important to you. I love that. For sure. I think that's really cool.
Well, it's very cool. I'm glad it works for you. I think it's important too to mention that this flow is what works for my wife and I. So, having a structure that you just talked about, where you look at the month, you go through the month, and then if you have some extra money, you could spend it on something like a little trip, or, buying something for the house or whatever it is. That system might work for someone else too, So I think I kind of get away from the prescriptive aspect of budgeting, saying that one system works well for everybody.
Yeah.
But I also take the view that you do, where I've looked at systems that work for other people, and I pick things up as I go, and I kind of add them to my system, or, maybe something doesn't work for us. It's just too rigid or structured that I know just won't be realistic for us. I just kind of just put that to the side and say that's not going to work for us. So I think finding a system and finding a flow that works for you is absolutely critical.
Yeah,
but
I think the one thing that we can definitely agree on is that this will take discipline. So,
yes,
this kind of extends a little bit to psychology here, the emotional part of it. How does somebody build that discipline, because, okay, fine, you make it look easy, but I imagine if somebody's going to sit down and try and do this for themselves, they're going to find it a little bit, taxing emotionally, mentally.
No, for sure. Absolutely. It takes a little bit of adjustment, maybe a lot of adjustment, depending on who you are, and adjusting your routine is going to be a huge part of this. So we've covered kind of how to set it up at the beginning of the month over here. The other part the part that really makes it convenient for us is that you can link this software to your accounts. So you can set it up if you guys have like a joint credit card that you spend and pay off every month, like my wife and I do. You can set that up. We also have like a Costco card that we use, and a Target card that we use for shopping at those places, and we pay those off every month. And then you can link it to those to pull in charges. You can link it up to your checking account, your savings accounts, like whatever type of accounts you have, this will work with it. And once you've linked it up, what it will do is it will pull the transactions in, and then you can take those transactions and drag and drop them to the various categories.
Yeah, that's really
so if you spent, it makes it real easy. So if you spent, let's say, $200 in groceries for the month, you can take that $200 charge, drop it over to groceries, and it'll show you over here remaining. It will go from $1,000 down to $800. And you can sort it by spent as well, where it can show you how much you've spent under it. So whichever view works better for you. But that works well for us because my wife and I both have the phone app on our phones. And if we are just curious, where we're at and how we're pacing out for the month, we can check in on that and say, okay, we're about halfway through the month. We've spent, 2/3 of our grocery money for the month. So let's see what we can do either to adjust that back or to continue to spend at that pace and take money out of some other category. Maybe we can cut back on, I don't know, maybe we can cut back on something else that we're doing. We're buying extra gifts for the month, or, going out to eat or things like that. Maybe we can cut back in those areas to adjust and compensate for it. But it makes it really easy for us because it's literally a drag and drop type thing. And you can kind of keep it on your phones and all be tied into your spending for the month.
Yeah. So if you're you've got a partner, you've got a wife or a husband. They both can use the same account. They both can access the same account.
Yep. Okay, so you create a login, you create an account, and so both my wife and I are signed into our account on our phones, and you can also sign in on the web browser as well. So you're all linked up to the same account. When you open it up, it'll show the same information. So it's worked well for us.
Yeah.
But what I'd say for anybody starting out is the first thing you probably should do is just download an app or a piece of software that tracks your spending, and start with tracking. Just start with going through for the month, not necessarily setting categories and holding yourself to a budget, but just go through, spend as you normally do for the month, and see what you're spending money on. Track those things out over the period of a few months. So take 2 or 3 months and just track your normal spending. And at the end of the month, that's going to give you an average of what you spend categorically, right? So you can look back at the end of, let's say, 3 months and say, okay, we've spent an average of $800 a month on groceries. So I know that's a rough ballpark for what we spend. Or we've spent an average of, $75 eating out. Or whatever it is, you can kind of look back categorically and make some averages and get a reasonable estimate of what you spend on those categories per month. And then what you can do is you can look at it and you can fine tune it. And in that fine tuning is budgeting. That's what it is. So you're looking at everything that you spend money on as you do now, and you're redirecting things to what your goals are, what you want to do. So if you're trying to pay down credit card debt and you decide, I think we could spend maybe $50 less on going out, eating out per month, or we can, cut down this category of the budget by another $100 or whatnot. We can take that $150 we freed up and put it into our debt payment. It's just being aware and conscious of your spending and knowing what you can do to redirect money to your goals. Sure. So I'd say for the first part, I'd recommend building that awareness to start, and then you can form a strategy based on what you know, because you can't do anything if you don't know what your spending is.
I honestly love that approach, because that takes away the pressure of having to just create this entirely new system that you have no idea about. Instead, it'll be a lot more beneficial to start from a place where you're just tracking, you're just analyzing what you're doing without the pressure of trying to change everything right away.
Yeah.
You might have an idea of what you'd like to change, but without that pressure of needing to change everything right away and just tracking, I think that really makes the transition into budgeting a lot easier, in my opinion. So that's really cool. Love that.
Yeah, that's kind of how we started out, was just kind of tracking our spending to start, and then we adjusted as we went. And I think it's important too, like once you get to the point where you're shifting out of just building awareness, and you're actually going to start making adjustments, take them small. You're not going to start out a successful dieting or exercise routine by going in and spending 5 hours in the gym one day when you've only worked out, 1 or 2 days a week before, or you're not going to start out a successful diet by cutting, 600 calories off your diet a day. Like, you need to make it in small, realistic adjustments. So what I would say is start out by adjusting your budget a little bit for the next month, seeing how that goes, and then just continue tweaking it until you're where you want, and you're putting money to your goals appropriately. So start realistically, start deviating just a small amount, what you think is achievable, and then deviate a little bit more. And then eventually you'll be kind of adjusted to where you want to be, and you'll be directing money in the appropriate places. But don't do too much too quickly either, because I think that sets you up for failure,
Yeah. So actually that's a great point and great segue. What are some of the things that could cause someone to fail at budgeting? So of course that's one of the things, starting with too much, but like, do you have any ideas? Like what are some of the stumbling blocks when it comes to budgeting?
Yeah, I think that's an important one, is doing too much too quickly, which we just covered. But I also think trying to budget without having an awareness of your money and where your money's going is going to set you up for failure. Because if you try and make adjustments to spending that you're not even sure is right, meaning if you try and make adjustments, you think, well, I'm just going to spend $600 this month on groceries, when you realistically spend about $900 a month, and that's not an achievable drop. You're just going to set yourself up for failure, So start by building awareness first, and then making those adjustments after. Discipline's a huge part of it. Discipline is going to take time. They say it takes 21 days to build a habit, but with budgeting, I would guess it's significantly longer. With budgeting, it's probably going to take a good 6 months before you feel like you're in a system that works for you and it's sustainable. Yeah. So give it time. And I think, starting with these smaller increments and something that's realistic for you sets you up for the long term, because you're not making these drastic changes. You're not sitting here saying, I'm going to. So, and then the other thing that came to mind too is, if you are not single, if you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, husband, significant other, whatever, start off by including your partner in the discussions as well. That's going to be a huge thing.
Oh, I like that, because now we're touching on the relationship aspect.
Yeah,
how does somebody not like, okay, let's assume the person isn't married, but they do have a serious relationship, or maybe they're considering starting a serious relationship with someone. How do they approach the topic of budgeting? Like, what are some of the healthy ways to go about starting this conversation?
Sure. So I think it's going to vary by the couple, but I think having a conversation is the first part. Is just sitting down, talking about your plans, and where you want to go together as a couple financially, and forming a plan that works for you. So if you're not married, if you haven't combined your households, you haven't combined your incomes, and you're not paying bills jointly and stuff, it's going to really kind of vary on the system that you have set up. I know a lot of people, when they're just they have like a boyfriend or girlfriend, they're living together, they're not officially combined yet. They have a system set up where, I'll cover this bill and this bill and this bill, you cover those. And generally speaking, I think that's a good way of handling it, kind of separating out the finances. But it's really going to kind of depend on you and how much you want to allocate to certain goals, and how much your significant other wants to do, and then kind of going from there. So,
okay. So
I don't know. What do you think?
Here's a difficult question for you. And of course, you've partially answered it. Everybody's different, but let's say you're somebody who really subscribes to this idea of budgeting. You want to take control of your finances. It's the right thing to do, but your partner doesn't agree. What do you do?
That'd be a hard one for me. So I think it would fall back on a conversation of sitting the person down and talking to them and saying, this is something that's really important to me. It's not something that's on your radar, maybe, so to speak. It's not something that you've set out as a goal for yourself, but maybe backing it out and explaining why it's important to you. These are the things that I want to achieve. This is how taking the steps of budgeting or allocating our money differently. These are the things that we could do with that, or the way we could set ourselves up well for the future. Kind of explaining maybe the goals that you have and why that would affect your life. Maybe that would be a more effective way of just rather than just sitting down and saying, I want us to adhere to a budget. This is what we're going to do. Like, I'm putting you on a diet too, without explaining why, or why it's important to you. I think that would be the way that I would approach it, is just explaining why these things are important, and the benefits that we might have, down the road because of it. But understand that you may approach the process differently. It may not be as organic for one person as it is for the other. And that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, So one person may be, of the mindset where they can sit down and do a budget every month and allocate their money. And the other person is just kind of out there floating in the ether financially, doesn't really think about things, it's not important to them. So it may take some adjustments on their part. You may have to be a little bit more understanding and patient when you bring that person along on that journey. But that's a tough question. There's no real good answer. But I think a conversation and just sitting down and explaining why it's important to you is a good first step. Yeah. And just seeing how that's received,
Okay, so we're fire grinders, though, right? We're people who are after this FIRE status. What kind of a budget do we need to have for somebody who's an aggressive saver and investor?
So ideally, the less money you can have servicing debt, the more money you can have going into various savings and investment vehicles, the better off that you are. So again, this is going to kind of go back to our overall plan, right? If you back it out, we've kind of talked about an overall plan of building an emergency fund and paying down high interest debt before you really get started with the investing aspect. And budgeting is also one of those things that's going to be critical in establishing a good savings rate. So some of the people that are more successful with reaching FIRE, financial independence, retiring early, have very high savings rates. Yeah. I've seen some people that have, they're able to save 50 to 70% of their take home pay, which is awesome.
That's amazing.
But they do that through being aware of where their money's going and directing it to the things they want to spend money on. So they may not go out to eat every month. They may say we'll go out to eat once a month. We'll spend $30 or $40, but that's it. Whereas somebody else spends a couple $100. They're able to set up their flow to direct most of their money to savings and investment vehicles, and that's what works for them. But they do that through building an awareness and being aware that they're redirecting their money to those things, and also having a system set up to track those things and see how that's affecting their overall picture, whether that's a net worth assessment or something different. But that would be a good thing to cover in a future episode, is net worth and just what the various things that go into it are, and how that gives you a big picture on your whole financial picture, and you can see progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
so maybe we'll come back and do that.
Yeah, I think that'll be very, very valuable.
Consider your taxes when you're looking at this.
Yes, absolutely.
And the reason I say that is we actually had a situation that we've kind of worked to our advantage in the last couple of years, based on our taxes.
Okay.
And so the situation that we had is we signed up when we bought the house. We set up a 30-year mortgage that we've been paying on every month. Mm-hmm. We really wanted to do a 15-year, but we couldn't quite make it work with our budget, just realistically. So we set up for the 30-year. Last year, we actually realized something, and that something was that we were basically getting about $4,000 to $5,000 back on our taxes every year, which means that we're overpaying our taxes to the tune of little over $400 a month. So what we did was we took that extra cash flow, we basically adjusted our tax rates to not capture that, and we took that extra $400-something a month and put that into our mortgage payment that we could pay, dropped down to a 15-year mortgage, refinance with the low rates, and we're able to shorten our mortgage term by half. We literally dropped from about 26 years down to 13 months, or I'm sorry, 26 years to 13 years.
That would have been even more amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been great. But we dropped it in half. We're going to pay something like $100,000 less in interest over the life of the loan. All through just looking at something. Yeah. All through looking at something most people don't even consider, which is their tax rates. So it didn't affect our cash flow really at all. We just backed off our tax situation. And so we're essentially getting $0 back in our taxes at the end of the year, but we've redirected that into something that's going to be beneficial for us. So
gotcha.
That may be something to consider too, but...
So of course that would be region specific and geographic specific. So definitely something to consider there. I think the most important thing here is that we want people to be aware of how their finances are actually working, and the best way to do that, in summary, I guess we could say, is track it. Before I go, I do want to share that I personally use a Google spreadsheet, which is not as fancy as Sean's, but it does exactly the same thing. Honestly, I'm probably going to switch over to that software because it looks so much easier. But the most important thing here is, regardless of what you use, those are just tools, right? We want to make sure that we're tracking how we're spending our money. We're analyzing that and then making adjustments based on our plan. And so that's kind of where we're taking you. That's the journey that we're all going on, really, is like Sean said originally, we want to get rid of all kinds of high interest debt, if possible, all debt. But I know that some of them are mandatory, like house loans and stuff like that. So,
the overall picture we're building here is a plan to get you where you want to be. And there's some things that you can dial in to start and build a solid foundation for that plan. This one here is absolutely critical. You have to have awareness of where your money's coming and going throughout the month to know if you're going to be able to redirect that to things that are important to you. Once you're able to do that, and once you get the budgeting process rolling, you'll have an idea of how much extra income you might be able to divert to those things, right? So if you have an extra $500 a month that you've fine-tuned, you've optimized, you realize you have $500 a month to put towards some of your goals, be that debt repayment or building your emergency fund or investing, then you have a ballpark of how much money you can use toward those goals. The previous episodes we've covered have really focused on those aspects that you need to have down before investing, which mainly take the form of having an emergency fund in place that's adequate for you and paying down high interest debt. So you can go back and find those episodes on prior episodes of Firegrinders. We cover each of those topics in extensive detail. But this basically this budgeting is kind of a foundation for anything in your financial plan, in that it lets you have awareness of where your money's going.
Absolutely.
So we've covered those before, emergency fund and debt, and also budgeting now. And we're finally going to get into the inner workings of investing and different ways to do that going forward, which is really how long-term you're going to build a lot of your wealth, is putting the money in and letting it compound, letting it grow over time. But you have to have a solid foundation before you're really ready to do that.
Absolutely. So guys, get those budgets down, get them dialed in, and that way you're going to be ready for your investment plan. We'll have links to all our recommended or showcased software and or resource materials in the show notes or in the description area. If you want, feel free to check them out there. You'll also find the companion guides, the written companion guides to these episodes on Fight Fire with Fire.net. That is Sean's site. You'll be able to find that linked in the show notes as well. You'll also find the Firegrinders website linked there if you want to check out other episodes or get in touch with us if you're interested in advertising or sponsorship of any kind. But yeah, we've had a blast talking to you all today. If this was helpful, definitely please hit that like button. Recommend it. 5-star reviews would be amazing and really help us out and create more exposure for us. Most importantly, if there's somebody out there that could benefit from this, please share it with them and hopefully they'll get some value from this too. Really appreciate you guys and we'll catch you all in the next episode.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.